It's really important for child protection to have a life course perspective. And what do we mean by that? What we mean is that what happens in the earliest periods of life, in the prenatal period, in the preconception period, really, has an impact on the developing child throughout their life course. That's a very different perspective than taking a sectoral approach that says, today it's the health sector that's responsible for the child, tomorrow it's the education sector. In fact, because we know the domains of development are integrated and they're not developing in isolation from each other, you have to have this life course perspective to be able to meet the holistic developmental needs of children. I think if you take a life course perspective in child protection, what that means in a humanitarian setting is that you're looking at different age cohorts. So you're looking across the sectors at what are the needs of, let's say, pregnant women and infants and toddlers holistically. Then what are the needs of the preschoolers? As of course we know their development changes, their needs change, but you're not doing it with a sector plan that says we're going to do this in education, we're going to do this in health. You're thinking about them with a life course perspective and in a holistic way. That's where we have to be moving in child protection. It's more of a preventive strategy, particularly when we consider the needs of the youngest children, which unfortunately are too often overlooked in crisis situations, because someone else is assuming that those needs are taken care of, or they're not as vocal and they're not as apparent as the needs of older children.
So what does all of this mean for those practitioners who are struggling to look at programs and work with families in the child protection sector? We have lots and lots of information about program evaluation, how to adapt and adjust programs, how to evaluate them, what are best practices. But perhaps I will just highlight 5 key factors that I think are important to keep in mind. These are not rocket science, but I think they just illustrate and build upon what we've been learning from the field of child development. But I'd like to just highlight a very important principle, which is often not talked about much, but it's basically that all of what we should do should be guided by the first step is the recognition of families and children's and culture's strengths. That it's child development and working with child protection is not based on filling in gaps. It's not to get rid of the deficits. Perhaps that's the second stage, but what we really need is an entry point that begins with and understands and builds upon what we know are the strengths of an individual family and child. So with that as an overarching principle, 5 key points about some things to think about. We have focused a lot in child development on child skills, but I think what we're recognizing now is we just assume that parents have these skills, that they understand the sequence and progression of child development, that they understand what you may do to support an adolescent who's going through a particularly difficult period. So I think our first obligation is to build and to support the caregiving, not just the parents, but all of those around the child, to build up their caregiving skills and responsive nurturing capacities. I think we need to also, when we look at Brofenbrenner's ecological model and framework, to begin to match our interventions to significant sources of stress. So we need to be more thoughtful in terms of where is this greatest adversity coming from at different stages in a child's life, and begin to match our interventions and target more of a targeted fashion to those recognized sources of stress. Third, and this is where we need also to link very closely with our colleagues in health and nutrition, this is so critically important, is within all of our programs to begin to find ways to integrate support and health and nutrition of children, as well as, and particularly in the early years of mothers before, during, and after pregnancy, because without sort of a foundation in health and nutrition, all of these developmental pathways, responsive caregiving, nurturing care, can't really begin to unfold. Moving beyond the family, the fourth point is to improve the quality of the broader caregiving environment. I can't speak enough to this fact when we look at some of the environments in which we promote child protection, such as safe spaces, such as early education programs, such as the school environment. We often talk about the numbers of children who are now entering school. I think we also need to look a little bit more closely. What's the quality of that environment, not only on their language and their cognitive skills, but what's happening in terms of their social and emotional development. So we need to look at the quality of the broader caregiving environment and ensure that those are also safe and protective and nurturing environments. When we move to we call them, and I'll use curricula in a very broad sense, but I think this is also an area where we can focus and have much greater attention, and also there's a huge body of knowledge that is now actually looking at the importance of establishing clear goals and curricula or interventions that actually work within clear goals and objectives. Oftentimes we establish, and this is true in the area of parenting education programs, where there's multiplicity of goals, but not actually a clear and guided framework for how you would actually go about achieving those goals and objectives. So it's not only important to identify which intervention, at which stage, and who your partners are, but to really take a closer look at the quality of the materials that are given to the facilitators and families in order to ensure the quality of that intervention.